In a world full of darkness, it's time to let the light shine bright. This is Strength to Overcome, where faith and action help us grow through adversity. G'day everyone, welcome back to the Strength to Overcome podcast. I am Matt Morton, your host, and I am blessed to be back with you for another episode this week, 51. And I have tentatively titled it, How Do You Keep Living After the Rabbit Holes? For a lot of people out there, you'll know what I mean by rabbit holes. Others will understand them as conspiracies, but it's not just rabbit holes and conspiracies this episode is about. It's about going down paths that at times might feel a little lonely, they might feel challenging, or it might just be you uncovering a path that for you is important, but to those around you, it may not necessarily have the same impact. And so what do we do with those times in our lives where we have gone down this path or we're challenging the narrative and it can feel very isolating, very alone? Because over the last few years, I've gone down a lot of what I would consider rabbit holes, and some have strengthened my faith. Some have challenged things that I thought I knew. Some have changed the way I read scripture. And some have just changed the way I see the world around me. And then somewhere along the road, the path, the journey, I've realized that discovering something isn't actually the hard part. The hard part is waking up the next morning and continuing to live. So how do you stay hopeful? How do you stay connected to the people who aren't necessarily asking the same questions, or they're not searching at all? How do you keep loving those people without expecting them to arrive at the same conclusions overnight? So I've got some points that I'm going to make. I'm going to put my glasses on for the bulk of today's episode because it gets harder to read my notes and stay on track without them. So on they go. And I want to look at point one, almost like a title of a chapter within this episode. Point one being, the truth is worth pursuing. Now, what do I mean by that? And I found a Bible verse that I think helps capture that, and it's John chapter 8, verse 31. It says, "If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." I've used that in a previous episode, maybe several, to be honest with you, and I think it, to me, really points to making sure that you stay on course. And this episode's not about regret. And it's not an episode about staying asleep. It's not an apology for asking the questions that I've asked over the years, because the truth matters. It matters to me. And to me, the scriptures matter. And asking questions, even outside of religion, it matters. Learning how to have critical thinking matters. So to me, and I encourage for a lot of people out there, the pursuing of truth is worth it. I've spent a lot of years asking questions that most people honestly don't even think about. I've spent years, sometimes decades, digging into topics that most people avoid. And while some of those journeys have been lonely, I absolutely don't regret searching. Because if the truth matters, then seeking it matters. But for me, I have found the challenge isn't finding the truth or wanting to dig on it. The challenge is learning how to carry that truth into the next day, into the next week, the next month, into conversations around you. So point two is the renewing of the mind. And I found Romans chapter 12, verse 2 highlights that point for me. It says, "Do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you'll be able to test and approve what Yahweh's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Now, of course, that's always debatable, but the search is still there for us to be diving in on. So I use this as an example for a lot of people out there that have been down this same path. If you ask someone, or the conversation comes up where you say, do you really think we landed on the moon? Most people don't immediately answer. You can almost see them calculating. What answer makes me sound intelligent? What answer makes me sound crazy? How will this person judge me? Those that are listening? How will I now be perceived? And so most people don't actually answer it from a place of conviction. They answer it from perception. And once you notice that, you start realizing how much of our thinking is actually influenced by approval, what people will think, the acceptance and the fear of judgment of the person that's asking or the person that might be listening to the fact that you've been asked that question. And so renewing your mind isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it means questioning assumptions. Sometimes it means realizing that you believed something simply because everyone else around you did, or what they might think if you answer something different. And transformation changes how you see the world. It can also change how you relate to people around you. And that brings me to point 3, which is the mistake that I made, and at times still continue to do. And I've used Luke 8:15, 8:15, where it says, the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble and good heart, who hear the word, retain it, and by persevering, produce a crop. And I use the book of Enoch as the example here because I remember the first time the book of Enoch was put in front of me by somebody else that was also searching and digging. And I had to come to that realization that the book of Enoch is still included in the Ethiopian Bible and has merit. And that, to me, was fascinating. Not because it proved anything initially, but because it raised questions that I had never considered, things that, to me, helped unlock some of the scriptures. And so it encouraged me into a deeper study to understand it more deeply. Then I made the mistake that I was referring to. I assumed, after reading it and diving in on these things, that everybody around me would be just as interested as I was. I assumed they would want to read it. I assumed that they would want to watch stuff about it. I assumed that they were going to continue studying into the things that I was looking at because of it. And let me be clear, I'm not necessarily talking about just the general pop. I mean, at the time this was brought to me, I was heavily involved in church. I was in a position to teach. I was surrounded by events, get-togethers, Bible studies, and these topics to me made a lot of sense that they should be discussed and talked about. And so on a broader scale, it might seem, well, of course, Matt, you're talking about something that's a little controversial or people haven't even heard of, or maybe some people haven't read in the Bible. They don't even know what you're talking about with regards to the book of Enoch. But at the time in my life, I was surrounded by people that were in the Word and that were studying and putting together these, Bible studies and things like that. So to me, it just made sense. And I was just so on fire to share some of this information and get it out there and have more people talking about it. And that didn't happen. And so it took me years and years and years of research and study and putting all these pieces together to get a deeper understanding. And then I would expect people to jump on board immediately and catch up, not realizing that it might have taken me years to get to a place where I was even receptive to something outside of Scripture or to dive in on something that might be a little bit tricky. And I had to understand that that's not necessarily how growth works for everyone, or at least not on the same timeline. Fruit requires patience, as I read above in that scripture. And I needed to give people, just like I was given, room to wrestle with those things themselves. And so I now go to point 4, planting the seed. I'm going to read this off of my notes here. It's in Mark chapter 4, verse 26. He also said, "This is what the kingdom of Yahweh is like. A man scatters seed on the ground, night and day. Whether he sleeps or gets up, the seed sprouts and grows, though he does not know how. All by itself, the soil produces grain. First the stalk, then the head, then the full kernel in the head. As soon as the grain is ripe, he puts the sickle to it because the harvest has come." So we've got the farmer planting, then the farmer waiting. Yahweh is the one that brings the growth, right? The sun, the rain, the elements around it that he created to do so. And the farmer doesn't force it. He doesn't pull on the plant. And he doesn't demand immediate results, which is, to me, an eye-opening concept, because something that I might have studied on for months or even years or maybe even decades is tough to wrestle through myself. So I can't expect those anywhere in my path or my realm of conversation to just arrive there in 20 minutes. And so maybe my role isn't necessarily to convince. Maybe my role is to simply plant the small seeds and trust that the Almighty will take care of the rest. What He has put in place is up to Him, not always up to me. And so to me, it's probably one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn, and I'm now doing an episode about it because I'm in the middle of learning it. Because even after learning that lesson, which I have started to realize is happening on a deeper level, there's still a part of the journey that nobody is actually talking about. And that's the loneliness. The feeling that something matters deeply to you and very few people around you seem interested at all. And this can apply to anything. This isn't just about scriptures or the book of Enoch or rabbit holes. If something matters deeply to you and you find yourself isolated in that, it's a real challenge. So moving on to point 5 is where I want to tell the story about Elijah in 1 Kings chapters 18 and 19, because it really resonates with me. Now, before we get into Elijah's loneliness, which we just tapped into a little bit there, it's important to understand what had just happened in this story, because Elijah wasn't coming off a defeat. He was actually coming off one of the greatest victories recorded in all of Scripture. Israel, Yah's people, had turned away from him, and the nation were following other gods, which we have talked about in previous episodes. They were following Baal. And Elijah challenged the prophets of these other gods to a showdown on Mount Carmel. And the challenge was simple. They had to build an altar. They had to place a sacrifice on it, but they weren't allowed to light it. Now, the God who answers with fire is the true God. And so the prophets of Baal, they spend hours and hours calling out to their gods, and nothing happened. They're shouting, they're dancing, they're cutting themselves. Still nothing happens. Then Elijah rebuilds the altar of Yahweh, and he places the sacrifice on it. And to make sure that nobody could claim a trick, right, smoke and mirrors, an illusion, he had water poured over everything. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And so we've got this altar with the sacrifice on it that was completely soaked. And even the trenches around the altar were filled with water. Then Elijah prays. And we pick it up in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 37, for those that want to follow along. And Elijah prays. He says, "Answer me, Yahweh. Answer me, so that these people, these prophets of these other gods, will know that you, Yahweh, are the true God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of Yahweh fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the soil, and it also licked up the water in the trench. Now, as you can imagine, and I'll read on, all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and they cried out, "Yahweh is the true God. Yahweh is the true God." Now, think about that for a moment. If there was ever a moment where someone should have felt encouraged, it was right then. If there's ever a moment where someone should have felt victorious, it was right then. If there's ever a moment where someone should have felt certain that Yahweh was with them, it was right then. And yet what happens next is one of the most human stories in all of Scripture to match one of the greatest victories in all of Scripture. Because after the miracle, after the victory, after this fire comes down from heaven, he goes through a series of events where now people are after him. Jezebel is after him. And so what does Elijah do? He runs off into the wilderness. And he says to Yahweh, "I've had enough." So we pick it up there in 1 Kings 19, verse 3 says, "Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. And he came upon a bush, he sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. 'I have had enough, Yahweh,' he says. 'Take my life, I am no better than my ancestors.'" So just pause there for a second, because I've always loved this, and I want to make sure people grasp what's happening here. He wants to die. He doesn't just say, "Hey man, I need a break. Let me take some vacation time. Let me take a long time off. Let me regroup. Let me see what shakes and I'll get back with you." He actually says, "I want to die." And this isn't before the victory. This is after the victory. This is after Yahweh had already showed up. Yahweh had moved, and Yahweh had already proved himself faithful. But Elijah still finds himself exhausted, discouraged, alone, isolated, and not just wanting to quit, but wanting to die. And if I'm honest, I think many people who go down rabbit holes eventually find themselves somewhere in this story. Not because they regret the searching, not because they regret learning, but because carrying what you've learned can be exhausting. Especially when you feel like nobody around you cares about the questions that matter deeply to you. Especially when the people closest to you aren't asking the same questions, or even care about the question or the answer. Especially after you are now trying to figure out, how do you continue living after your perspective has changed? But here's what I love about this story in 1 Kings. Yahweh doesn't show up and lecture Elijah. He doesn't tell him to pray harder. He doesn't tell him to study more. He doesn't even tell him to stop being discouraged. We pick it up in 1 Kings 19:5. Then he lay down under the bush and he fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. It's a miracle. The first thing that Yahweh gives Elijah isn't a sermon. It's rest, it's food, it's water, it's sleep, it's recovery. And sometimes after a rabbit hole, we don't need another documentary. Sometimes we do. We just need that rest. We need a little time for some perspective. And sometimes we need to remember that we're human. And story continues in verse 7. The angel of Yahweh came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up, ate and drank, strengthened by that food, and he traveled 40 days and 40 nights. To me, I love that phrase. The journey is too much for you. Because sometimes that's exactly how life feels. It's not just the rabbit holes. It's life. It's marriage. It's parenting. It's responsibilities. It's work. It's questioning things. It's loneliness. And the journey feels too much for us. Yet in this story, Yahweh doesn't abandon Elijah. He strengthens him for the journey. Then Elijah arrives at a cave, and Yahweh asks him a question in verse 9. He says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah responds in verse 10, "I've been very zealous for Yahweh Almighty, and I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too." Notice what Elijah's saying. I am the only one left. And this is where loneliness begins to talk. And isolation begins to whisper in your ear. Disappointment and discouragement begins to take a hold. And if we're not careful, we can start believing the same thing. Nobody understands. Nobody gets it. Nobody cares. Nobody sees what I see. Nobody wants to have these conversations. Nobody wants to ask these questions. They certainly don't want to hear an answer. Nobody wants to go on this journey. And then comes one of the most beautiful moments in Scripture, verse 11 and 12. Yahweh says to him, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of Yahweh, for the Almighty is about to pass by." Can you imagine this? Elijah's down and out, wants to die, thinks he's completely alone. And Yahweh says, wait for what's about to happen. A great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart, but Yahweh was not in the wind. After the wind, there's an earthquake, but Yahweh was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but Yahweh was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. And I think, to me, that's the lesson many of us need. Because when we're deep into the research, we're often looking for that next massive revelation. Wind, earthquake, fire, a shocking discovery, the next piece to the puzzle, the next rabbit hole. Yet Yahweh met Elijah in the whisper. It wasn't a spectacle, not chaos, not drama. It was in the whisper. And finally, Yahweh answers Elijah's loneliness. He says in verse 18, I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to these gods. In other words, Elijah, you're not alone. You just don't know where the others are. And maybe that's true for some of us too. Maybe there's more people asking questions than we realize. Maybe there are more people searching than we realize. Maybe there are more people wrestling with these things than we realize. Maybe we're less alone than we think. And it's not about being smarter than anyone. It's not about being better than anyone. It's about being human. And Elijah reminds us that even strong people that witnessed great miracles can become discouraged. Even faithful people can become lonely. Even courageous people can become exhausted. But Yahweh meets people where they are. And sometimes that's enough to keep taking the next step. Which brings me to point 6. Don't let the search change your heart. And I've found Micah chapter 6, verse 8. It says, He has shown you, O mortal man, what is good. And what does Yahweh require of you? What now? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with Him. So the goal isn't to win arguments. The goal isn't to prove people wrong. The goal isn't to become the smartest person in the room. According to that scripture, the goal is more humility, more patience, more mercy, more love. And if the pursuit of truth makes us arrogant, then we're missing something. If it makes us bitter, we've missed something. Truth shouldn't be a negative effect. It should be a freeing effect. It should change my life. It shouldn't harden my heart. Point 7, don't quit. I've got Galatians chapter 6, which shows up a lot lately, verse 9. It says, Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. If we keep reading, if we keep studying, if we keep asking questions, if we keep digging, if we keep pursuing the truth, but don't stop living. Keep showing up for your family. Keep showing up for your responsibilities. Keep showing up for the people that you love. And keep showing up for the life that Yahweh the Almighty has given you. Because the rabbit hole isn't the destination. It's just part of the journey. And the journey continues tomorrow. I've spent years, decades, wanting people to see what I see. And maybe part of maturity is realizing that not everyone is on the same timeline. Not everyone is asking the same questions. Not everyone is ready for the same answers. My job isn't to force growth. My job is to remain faithful. I'm still here. I'm still digging. Everyone that knows me knows I will continue to strive to learn more. I'm still showing up, trying to be a better husband. I'm still showing up every day, trying and learning to be a better father. And I'm still striving and learning how to love people well and where they are. And if you're somewhere in the middle of your own rabbit hole, whatever that is, maybe that's enough for today. Keep digging, keep searching, keep showing up. Trust that the Almighty has your back and that there are others out there that He has set aside to support us, carry us through, in addition to His love and His mercy, which He has called us to walk in. I appreciate everyone being here. Continue to stay strong, and I'll catch you all next week. Cheers.